Good afternoon. We're calling this meeting of the Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency to order. Roll call, please.
Matt Conant.
Present.
Bruce Johnson.
Here.
Bill Conley.
Here.
Todd Kimmelshoe.
Here.
Bo Shepard. Here. Mark Boomgarden.
Here.
Wade Kirchner.
Here.
Drew Stresser. Lackfair Gog.
Yes.
Mike Morris.
Here.
Chris Schmidl.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming. Wade Kirchner will lead us in the flag salute, please.
Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first item, public comment. Members of the public will be allowed to address the Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency Board of Directors on items of interest to the public that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. Any member of the audience who may wish to bring a matter before the board has not placed it on the agenda may do so at this time. However, state law provides that no action may be taken on any item not appearing on the posted agenda. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, moving on. Consent calendar. Consent calendar groups together those items of interest which are considered non-controversial or which prior policy direction had been given to staff and that require only routine action by the board. The chair will advise the audience on the matter may be adopted by one total motion. However, the board may to at its own option or upon the request of a member of the public consider any matter separately.
I'll make the motion.
All the consent, 1 through 5, right?
Yes.
Do you want to do a roll call?
You don't have.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Okay. Number 6, informational and possible approval items. Number 6, update on Orville Wildlife Robinson Riffle.
All right, Director Conant, I'm going to have Chris Fritz, our Director of Engineering, provide this presentation. So, wanted to give the board a good informational update on this project. We've made a lot of progress to date since receiving our grants to move this project along, and Chris is going to give you guys a good update, and then we can answer any questions at the end.
All right. Hello, members of the board. Chris Fritz, Director of Engineering. So bear with me a little bit. I've got about 30 slides that I'm going to run through as fast as I can. This overview presentation is basically a Cliff Notes version of the workshop that we held with DWR and a lot of the resource agencies in October. So I'm going to dive into the background of the study and just try to give you a good high-level sense of some of the concepts that we're looking at for this planning study effort that we're moving forward right now. So just a little background, the study area is shown here in blue. The land is the Orville Wildlife Area. It is a designated wildlife area owned by DWR and managed by CDFW. The area has been impacted in the early 1900s with the dredging operations. It was then used as the borrow pit for the construction of Oroville Dam, and since that time it's been largely left in that condition following the borrow operations, aside from this agency's D-Unit project work. The study area is within the state's FERC relicensing boundaries, so any of the work that we would propose to do or would like to do will be needing to seek FERC approval. And the area for our D-Unit project that we embarked on in 2014 is highlighted there in yellow. And that work was essentially what or is how we became engaged in this Robinson's Riffle restoration project. So because of the success that we had with that D-unit work, we were encouraged to basically continue and build upon that work to extend into other areas of the wildlife area. So we won't get into the details here on the D-unit timeline, but I just did want to highlight that we are where we were with the D-unit project back in 2014. So in 2014 was when we got our first planning grant for that D-unit work. We have just finished wrapping up some of the post-project monitoring activities for that D-unit project. And so just wanted to kind of highlight we're at the very beginning of this Robinson's Riffle effort and just beginning on that endeavor. These are just some neat photos. I like the one in the top left. That is the Feather River right at the bend where the Thermalito Afterbay is. So that picture is taken prior to the construction of Oroville Dam, prior to the Afterbay facilities. And I like it because it does a good job, I think, highlighting the impact of the dredging operations. And you can see a lot of the areas that the state ended up utilizing the material for construction of the dam. And then some of the other areas are largely still, how they remain today. The other photos are some aerials of the wildlife area today, and the bottom two are actually the D-unit project. So the bottom right, you can see the river there is on the left, and the D-unit is on the right side of that elevated berm. And the D-unit work, part of the work that we did as part of that project is reconnect that D-unit area directly to the main channel of the Feather River. And you can see a better picture of that example here, where we installed the box culvert feature, which connected and now allows that area within the D-unit area, or within the D-unit, to be directly connected back to the river channel. Some other improvements of that D-unit project were interior channel improvements, kind of shown here. We implemented and constructed some pedestrian bridge improvements, better trails and hiking access within that area. Implemented some parking area improvements. This one here is right across the river from the Afterbay outlet, right across from the boat ramp and campground work that we're working on right now. This is another example of some of the river access improvements that we did as part of that D-unit project. This one is up in the northwestern part of the project. This is a vehicle access bridge we improved primarily for emergency access for vehicles to be able to get into certain parts of the wildlife area. And then this is an example of some of the weir improvements that we constructed. This feature allows more high water or flow to be conveyed through the wildlife area during times of high water to reduce flood stages within the main channel and along our levee system. And this is an example of the outflow weir improvements. So I wanted to highlight just a few of those to kind of set the stage for what we're looking to expand upon as we embark in the planning effort that we're working on today. The wildlife area is shown there, highlighted in red. You can see the D unit, and then the other units are what we're going to be focusing on for the Robinson Riffle planning study. So the units A through H. The study that we have right now is funded through a grant from DWR through their FMPRA grant program. It is a master plan type study. So we're looking at identifying concepts. We have activities, outreach activities to vet those concepts, evaluate them, and hopefully work to identify next steps for advancing concepts that have broad support. This here is just a summary of the scope of our study effort. It's about an 18-month study, so we'll be working throughout next year on on this process. As part of the development of those concepts, we vet them through a series of workshops with DWR and the other resources agencies. We evaluate and refine them, and like I said, hopefully get them to a point where some of them can be advanced depending on funding. This is a highlight of the study schedule. We are kind of in the middle of that arrow right now. We just finished the first workshop, and we're starting to evaluate some of the concepts that have merit. And I'll be going over some of those concepts here in a minute. This just highlights some of the outreach we've done to date, and the large part of the work on the technical front is being completed by Sbfca, the project team, in coordination closely with DWR Oroville Field Division staff, CDFW, and also River Partners. So this is just an overview of some of the initial concepts that have come up and have been developed to date. Like I said, we don't have time to get into the details on all of these today, but what I've done is tried to group them into some different categories so that I can kind of give you a high-level overview of what we're looking at. So one of the big concepts, pretty exciting, that we're looking at trying to implement is removing the relic tailing piles that exist throughout some of those wildlife areas. You can see examples of this work being done along the Yuba River right now, up near the gold fields. And there are a lot of very similar areas within the Oroville Wildlife Area that those same type of activities could be undertaken. And those activities would allow that material to be removed, reestablish that historic floodplain. And the other big benefit is it reduces the flood stages during the flood events, those high flow events, the 100-year, 200-year. It'll reduce the stages that we see up against the levee system. So a lot of good benefits that we're looking at with this type of project. This here is an example of one of the areas that we're looking at right now. So this is a aerial view of the reach downstream of the After Bay outlet. So this is looking south, and you can see the cobble piles both on the right side in this photo, right side of the river, and then also right there along the middle of the island. And as I'm sure you're all aware, those areas are kind of like a moonscape almost. Nothing grows, there's no vegetation. And so the concept is to come in, remove areas targeted, and reestablish some of the vegetation and lower flood stages. The little colorful figure you see there on the right, that's LiDAR. So the areas in red are basically showing kind of the areas that we would be looking to target for material removal. And then this shows just a kind of a conceptual view of kind of the areas that could benefit with removing that material. So this is the river at about 5,000 CFS. And then with no changes in flow, just looking conceptually at removing some of the material, you can see the additional shallow area that could be inundated, similar to the area that you see on that aerial photo on the left. So that's the D unit where we reestablish some of that shallow flooding, and that could be what we end up looking at doing for some of the work with this project. This is another little example, just kind of showing the area there on the right, north of Vance Flats. So some significant acreage that we're looking at. One of the concepts that kind of ties in with the tailing pile removal is the creation of kind of what we're referring to as high ground refugia. So what do we do with that material after you remove it? One of the concepts would be to pile it up in some designated areas within the wildlife area to create some additional upland habitat. because what we've heard is when this area floods during the high water events, wildlife doesn't have a lot of places to go. It gets pushed out into the urban areas, or it'll get congregated along some of the elevated access roads. So this concept would be to basically kind of create some of that upland areas where wildlife could go and take refuge during the high water events, and it ties in nicely with what we would need to do with looking at balancing some of those cut and fill activities. Some of the O&M improvements that we're looking at doing, we are looking at hardening some of the weirs that allow water to flow in and out of some of those units. So this is kind of an example here of the area where water flows into the A unit up there in the north. And you can see it's an unimproved road that every time water flows in and out, it washes out. And the state has to come in, repair the road. And so one of the concepts is to, similar to what we did in the D unit, harden these locations so that you don't lose access immediately following those high flow events. And that's just an example of what we ended up doing for the D unit. We're also looking at some side channel improvements. So once you remove that material, you could almost imagine kind of a flat blank canvas of area that could be restored. So we're working closely with some of our partners to look at some potential new side channel concepts to create a more complex river system in some of the areas that we're targeting for the material removal. Also looking at creating some seasonal wetland habitat. So these areas are not necessarily directly connected to the river, but the Oroville wildlife area is very porous. And so when you excavate down to a certain depth, groundwater is very shallow. So with some targeted activities, you can create additional wetland habitat. So we've been exploring some areas within the wildlife area where we could potentially look at some of those types of improvements. Also looking at site access and public safety, so looking to improve on the existing access roads and non-motorized boat ramp locations within the different parts of the wildlife area. And recreation as well, so looking at potential new trails, looking at like I said, kind of renovating some of the takeout locations that people are using now for the non-motorized, and even in some cases motorized takeouts. And then, of course, one of the big highlights that I wanted to kind of bring up as an early success is our After Bay boat ramp and campground project. So early on in this planning study, we identified that feature, and it was one of those that had broad support. We ended up seeing some funding opportunities that were out there, and we jumped on it. And so that's something that we were able to capitalize early on in this planning effort, and kind of shows you, hopefully, some of the success that we'll have as we continue to kind of further evaluate and vet some of these concepts. This is just a highlight of the funding that we have received to date. So since we've started on this effort, we've secured about $11 million total in funding. 1.5 of that is there on the left, the FMPRA grant that funds the planning effort. And then the 2 there on the right are the $7.7 million that we've secured for the boat ramp and campground design, permitting, and construction. And then we have another 2 that we've secured to start design, permitting, and for some of the concepts that we're developing right now. Also wanted to highlight that we do still have future funding needs. So as we continue to work through some of those workshops, we'll be working with some of our partner agencies to hopefully identify some additional sources of funding to continue with what we need for design and construction. So this is the last slide. Next steps, we have our second workshop scheduled in spring. That's where we're going to go into more detail on some of these concepts with our partner agencies, and also hopefully start the dialogue on potential funding. Because we do know that that's going to be a big focus. These are, you know, some bigger ticket items we're looking at trying to get implemented. But when you look back at the D unit work, you know, all in all, that ended up being about a $25 million total project. This one, there's a lot of potential and opportunity, of course, depending on funding sources. And so we're hopefully at the end of the planning effort be in a good position to try to capitalize and be a little bit opportunistic on potential funding that may be out there to advance some of the concepts that have broad support. And with that, I will turn it back over to the board.
Any questions for Chris?
Yeah, through the chair.
Yes.
Chris, just out of curiosity, that island that we're wanting to remove, did it grow quite a bit in 17?
Actually, I don't believe so. So yeah, that island just south of the Afterbay outlet is still, at least when I've been out there recently, very heavy cobble. And it's in a section of the river system that is a little bit sediment starved. Yep. And you actually see some higher velocities through that reach because it's honestly a little bit of a bottleneck when you look at it from a flood control system perspective. There's a lot of elevated material there, and it's a section of the river that within, you know, you look at the high flows that make their way down from the dam, and it really gets constricted through there. Okay. And that's where the D unit project actually helped open the conveyance up for some of those high flows to then flow through the wildlife area in lieu of just being constrained through that tight reach.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions for Chris?
Yeah, they've considered any artificial spawning beds or canals. I mean, there's, especially below the outlet where you have enough flow, why not bring it up? I mean, maybe you, instead of having an island there, you make it a controlled spawning area where you can control as much as the predator fish out and let the good fish in, spring run especially. Yeah,
that's a good point. And we've actually brought that up as part of some of that work that we would look at south of the Afterbay outlet, north of Vance Flats.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yep. And
you'd always have great enough flow where the upper reach, it wouldn't be there. Yeah, and
a few of the resource agencies have actually started thinking about that. Of course, the first step is going to be to figure out, you know, how to get that material out, where do you put it, and work through the funding. But if we were able to do that and
Granite wants it. Take it right over to the plant.
Which did come up as part of the workshop because you cannot use public funds to privately sell the material. So we're working through some of those logistics. But yeah, you're right. That could open up a blank canvas for.
And the other thing, please don't lose sight of above Robinson's Riffle. When you lower that, try to get it as low as you can, because what we're preventing there is a surge flooding back into the industrial area, which in 97 almost reached the sewer plant. And by lowering that, that cures that problem. And that's why I brought this up like 10 years ago, as we've been looking for something like that. Just don't lose sight of that.
No, and it's a good point, and I actually should have.
And that relieves the entire system all the way down. It's like a surge flood area.
Yep. Yeah, and we actually, I can show you for some of those concepts that we've been looking at, we have been keeping that in mind, and the removal of some of the material right there near Robinson's Riffle does have a big impact, like you're saying.
Yeah, because it hairpins and it can't go. So
yeah. Yeah, and so we're definitely keeping that in mind with the concepts that we're developing.
You may laugh, but there's still a lot of gold there. Let me tell you, when they repaired the spillway, a lot of material like went away. Piles of it.
They tried to tell me there was no gold in the debris coming off the side of the hill. I was like, they have a trommel down there. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's a side. So you're not allowed to sell the rock.
Well, not if you use public funds. You can't use public funds to then privately sell material.
Through the chair. So, well, I am the chair. So that's the question. So, Chris, but I want to get a clarification on that. So if you decided you had too much rubble and rock in this project, couldn't you put it out to bid to somebody to buy the rock that could have been turned back into the project?
Well, I guess, and we're exploring this right now, but I believe there's some ways to potentially form a partnership with companies that may be interested in that material, but to formally hire a
Right.
private entity to then go and sell
Right.
it.
No, they would have to harvest it and
Yeah,
pay
but,
you so much a ton or yard or whatever.
yeah, but partnerships are, I think, a little bit of a different
Animal.
story. Yeah.
Okay. Any other question for Chris? Thank you. Nope.
Proceed, proceed.
Okay.
Great presentation.
Yeah, thanks.
Great presentation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I tried to boil a lot
Proceed
down as
with
fast
the
as I could.
project,
So.
is what I'm saying.
Yeah, proceed with the project, yes.
We
Plow.
appreciate you working in Butte County. Good work.
So
We share the district.
we're moving on to presentation and file of monthly financial report. Seth?
It's got a tail on it this time. Good afternoon, board members. Seth Wurzel, Agency Budget Manager. So this is our monthly financial report for the month ending October. Just wanted to point out the note at the bottom of this slide. So the financial report that you received on the dais and that was provided as draft, it has not yet been formally signed off. We were told verbally by Yuba City that the information is good. They just didn't, due to holidays and scheduling, didn't have a chance to finalize and sign off on that. So please consider this draft. As soon as we have it formally signed off, we'll include it in the next board packet. So month ending October of 23, about 24.25 million. When we take into consideration accrued revenues and expenses, about 25.8 million in working capital to date. So looking at the revenues, for 22-23, 822,000, nothing yet for revenues for 23-24. We're still waiting on our first tax apportionment. Tax bills were just due December 10th. So those funds have not been apportioned back to the agency yet. From a capital revenue perspective, for 22-23, about 16.7 million, and for 23-24, about 2.5 million. So the combined difference in revenues for operating and capital is about 3.6 million. So when we take a look at our table here, so in terms of the accrued revenues to date, about 861,000 from the state makes up a portion of that 3.6 million in difference. And then in terms of our assessments, we're reporting on what we've accrued, about 2.8 million to date, based on half of the assessments for fiscal year 23-24. So when you add those together, that's the difference of 3.6 million in revenues accrued versus through month ending October. We have, again, 861,000 in payments, and the listing on the right just kind of shows you all the different grants that we have payments that we're waiting on. In terms of our expenditures for fiscal year 23-24, total paid about 600,000 for through October, and then for 22-23 about 6.6 million. The 304. make sure I understand what I'm trying to say here. So total paid expenditures through October was 596 to date, 304. There is the way we're accounting, the reason why it goes down, the way we're accounting for a refund of 750,000 from the Corps is a negative expense. Essentially, the way we're handling this, Michael will get into this a little bit on the vaults and the work that we did with the Corps. We had previously made payments to the Corps. They're sent 750,000 of that back to us, essentially a prior payment. So we're counting that as a negative expense versus a revenue. So that's why the expenditures are going down from 596 down to 304, because it's net that 750 that's been returned to us. Just wanted to make sure that that was clear and why the expenditures through October relative to date are going down. In terms of our financing, the next debt service payment is due in April. That's 1.6 million. And then you can also, on the prior bullet, you can see that where we've spent the money, and then again, that negative 750,000 there. So in terms of financial activities for all our different grants, I'm just listing out the activities that we're advancing right now. Close out of our UFR grant. Again, pending all the right-of-way transfers, we expect that to happen early next year. We did extend the agreement through December of 2024, just to make sure we can we have the ability to continue to work on that and complete the grant prior to its expiration. All the grant obligations, all the work in the Oroville wildlife area, the various grants that Chris addressed, continuing to process payments, closing out some of them, closing out continuing to process payments on our small communities grant, and then on our sediment removal grant, and then working with the state on processing payments for the Sutter Bypass East Levee project, and continuing work on our Feather River RFMP Phase 4 grant. We're working to set up the process of invoicing with the City of Oroville now that we have our services agreement in place. So that's getting set up in coordination with the city. And then with respect to our assessments, internal agency work, everything is completed for fiscal year 23-24. The next step is just our annual bond disclosure reports due in March, and finalizing, and that linked to that is the finalization of our audit for 22-23. And then with respect to the regional development impact fee, we're working through the adoption process. The remaining item is with the City of Yuba City, which is scheduled for December 19th. Once the city, should they approve that, once they take action, and if it's approved, we'll then start the coordination process. The ordinance will be effective 60 days later. We're going to work through the process with all of our member land use agencies on the collection and remittance of any collected fees on an annual basis. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them now, but that concludes my report. Thank you very much.
Nothing? Nope. Too good a job. Thank you. Okay, Michael, I guess you're on deck.
Hey, last but not least, right? So good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. It's good to see everybody today. And, you know, we didn't have a meeting last month because we didn't have any action items, and we didn't want to take up your valuable time if we didn't have any pressing needs for the meeting. So we deferred a lot of the items to this board meeting. So I'm going to highlight some of the actions going on here with the agency. Feather River West Levee Project 1, we're still in project closeout mode. As Seth indicated, we did extend our grant funding agreement with the state for another year. It was supposed to end this month, and we extended it to 2024, but we're just in closeout mode, so that's really all it was. But on the environmental mitigation side of things, Andrea and I had a good call with our resource agency partners last week, I believe it was. And we're getting much closer to the end. We thought we were at the end. We had submitted all the final documents for agency blessing. And then they came back with some final minor edits that they wanted us to incorporate into some of the documents. So we're in the process of doing that. And then we'll send them back for hopefully final blessing, and then we can finalize that whole process. Cultural resources also, we got the green light from the Army Corps to finalize the Butte County Cultural Mitigation Report. We received minor comments from tribes of interest, and we're finalizing those documents, so that's really good news. Also on the right-of-way acquisition front, we had 3 remaining properties. 1 was with a private property owner and 2 were with state agencies. And we've gotten through those processes. So we're now just recording those documents through title companies, and we'll be done on the whole right-of-way process. And we're in the process of transferring those properties over to the state. On Feather River West Levee Project 2, what we call Tudor Flood Risk Reduction Project, it's the 1.6 miles between Highway 99 Bridge and Sutter Bypass. We just received 90% design plans or documents from our consultant. So those are under review and we're providing comments to our consultant. They'll incorporate our comments, address those, and then we'll issue those documents out to our agency partners for their review. We do have an independent panel of expert meeting on January 16th. So we're getting prepared for that meeting. That includes the state, both Department of Water Resources, Central Valley Board staff, and then U.S. Army Corps staff will attend that, along with our independent panel of experts. We're also working closely with the United Auburn Indian community on cultural resources concerns, and we're working those through in a very positive way. So we're incorporating their input into the process. We're writing up an environmental assessment for the Army Corps as part of their NEPA process. So our consultant will supply that document to the Corps. And we're advancing the 408 review process with the Army Corps. So all of that work ideally is going to be concluded later next year. I'm anticipating going out to bid in late 2024 and opening bids in early 25, awarding a contract, and then be in construction in 2025. So that's the process or schedule for that project. All right, Sutter Bypass East Levee repair. So that's 5.2 miles along the Sutter Bypass East Levee. We are at about a 30% design stage there. Our consultant will be sending in the 30% package right before Christmas, probably put a little bow on it. And then we'll be reviewing that package and providing our comments back to the design team. Also coordinating closely with DWR because they're actually going to be advancing the environmental documentation process for the project. And then lastly on this first bullet, the BRIC. So that's the a FEMA grant process. So we're applying for actually both BRIC and FMA. So there's 2 grants through FEMA that we're applying for this project to get construction funding. Those grants applications are due today, and so we'll be submitting those to Cal OES, the Cal Emergency Operations Services. And once they approve them, then they will submit them to FEMA, and that would happen early next year. So we'll keep you posted on that process. OWA Robinson's Riffle, Chris just provided you guys a great update on where we're at on that project. Also on the boat ramp and campground project, we are advancing design on that project, design and permitting. And that project is similar to the Tudor Flood Risk Reduction in terms of schedule. We're hoping to be able to bid it late next year and be in construction in 2025. And we're also applying for BRIC and FMA grant funding through FEMA for the OWA Robinson's Riffle. So that's exciting. So we're going after FEMA money for both of those projects, OWA Robinson's Riffle and Sutter Bypass East Levee. On the sediment removal project, we have a grant into the NOAA, federal agency, and that's for the full $10 million to fully remove that island at the confluence of the Feather and the Yuba. And so we're hoping to hear something in what we're hearing is probably springtime, early spring of next year is when we'll find out whether or not we're successful. We did have a really strategic meeting with Senator Nilo a couple months ago now. And so we sat down with the senator and explained the project, the permits that we have in hand that are going to expire, all the applications, grant applications we've been going after and unfortunately been unsuccessful. So he accepted our request for him to engage with both DWR and CDFW, and he actually arranged to have a meeting with both of their directors. And it was a very positive meeting. I got a call from his staff right after the meeting. And essentially the two directors agreed to two things. One was to send in a support letter, a joint support letter from DWR and CDFW signed by their directors to NOAA in support of our grant application, because they really love to see federal money come in and assist. If that's unsuccessful, if we're not able to get that grant, then they're going to work on our behalf to extend the permits that we have for the project. Now, that would only be for the state permits under their purview, and we'd have to get assistance to extend federal permits. So we're hoping we don't have to go that route. You know, hopefully the NOAA grant will come through, but we'll just keep our fingers crossed. And hopefully by early spring of next year, we'll know something. On our regional flood management planning, I just wanted to highlight one of the projects, the Cherokee Canal Corridor Management Plan. So we've been working closely with DWR to understand what they're going to do with, they received $20 million in funding for deferred maintenance. And they have been putting together a program to understand, you know, what needs to be done to fully repair or restore the Cherokee Canal to its original design capacity. And that project, they've come up with different alternatives, but the preferred alternative was about a $200 million project. So very expensive. And what's interesting is 100 million of that is construction and the other 100 million is mitigation. So because the canal is full of riparian habitat now, I quote unquote, because it's really a drainage canal, but now it's, from a regulatory standpoint, it's habitat. It's almost one for one, dollar for dollar, construction versus mitigation. So what they're going to do is they're going to roll out a project. So they have like phase 1, 2, and 3, and then under phase 1 they have A, B, C, because they only have 20 million right now. So they're going to advance a project with the available funding, and they're hoping to get that started, I believe, in 2025, because it's going to take a while to design and permit that project. I did ask them to come in next year to this board and give a presentation on that project. They were very receptive to that. So I'm thinking, I think they said like April would be the earliest that they could do that, because they got to run this process through their chain before they have the preferred alternative and the blessing on how they're going to roll out this project. So keep in mind that'll be coming probably March or April of next year. I'll have the DWR come in and give a short presentation on Cherokee Canal. In addition, we're advancing other projects through RFMP, but one thing I wanted to highlight to the board, I did get a call late last week from our project manager from DWR, and it's looking like the funding is all drying up under this program. We think we're going to get a phase 5 grant that's already been budgeted, so that'll happen next year, later than we thought. We thought it was going to be in the spring. Now it's going to be late summer. But from what we're being told, or what DWR is being told by the Department of Finance, is this is one of the cuts that they're looking at, because state budget is pretty dismal this coming year and into the early future. So unfortunately, it's looking like this program may run out of money. So what that means going forward, the state has to come up with their Central Valley Flood Protection Plan update, which is due in 2027. But usually they have all the local agencies participate in that process. And if we don't have funding to do that, that's going to be difficult for a lot of agencies to perform. So I'm going to find out more from our DWR project manager on that process, and I'll keep the board informed there. Next slide, please. This is the last slide. On the City of Oroville levee repair, so we, as I reported last time to the board, we submitted a feasibility study application to the U.S. Army Corps. And this, if the city's project was selected, the Corps would initiate a feasibility study. And essentially what that is to understand and document what the deficiencies are, look at alternatives to repair those deficiencies, mitigate those deficiencies, come up with a budget, a project cost, and then that feasibility study would have to go to Army Corps headquarters to the Chief of Engineers to get approved. And then if it's approved at that level, then it goes to Congress for authorization for the project and then appropriations. So that's a long, drawn-out process. So that's our Plan B. Plan A is to get state funding to initiate the project. And we did have a really good meeting with DWR Deputy Director Gary Lipner and some of his staff to identify possible funding programs within the state. Like I just said, the state budget's not looking good. All of the programs that they have are unfunded going into this coming year. So we're just going to keep our eye on things. We set up another meeting for January to talk about where things are with their programs and any types of available funding. So in the meantime, they're going to go back in and look at, their budgets and see if there's any money left over in any of the programs that were not able to use money. So we have a good dialogue going. So that's a positive thing, but that's the best I can report right now. And I'm keeping the city staff updated as we move forward on this process. On the federal project, the board just approved the contract with HDR to look at the punch list for the Feather Water District facilities that were those leaking vaults. So now we're going to go in and design the repairs, and then I'll probably be taking and we'll go out to bid, and I'll bring construction contracts back to this board sometime next year so that we can go in there and complete that work. And as Seth alluded to, we did get a $750,000 check back from the Army Corps to perform this work. So that's being paid for by project costs. We're also continuing to negotiate with Sbfca. I'm hoping to be able to bring some information back to the ad hoc committee of Todd and Charlie in January to provide updates, and hopefully by February or March of next year, hopefully we'll have an agreement in place to be able to, for the board's consideration. So I don't have any more news on that right now, but we are advancing our discussions and dialogue with the Sbfca team. FEMA remapping Sutter County, we're waiting on the as-built from the Army Corps to finalize the package to be sent to FEMA. We're also communicating with Sutter County staff, Yuba City staff. We'll be communicating with City of Live Oak staff, just so everybody's aware of this process, and that document should be submitted probably in the spring of next year. Regional development impact fees, we've been very successful at all our member agencies. City of Live Oak was the last to pass and approve the fee on new development to fund levee improvements into the future. City of Live Oak will be considering that on the 19th of this month, so we'll look forward to that on next Tuesday. And assuming it's approved, we're fingers crossed, then we'll finalize it and we'll communicate with all of the member agency staff so that fee can be put in place early next year. Let's see, the last bullet here, El Nino. I brought this up at the last meeting. All the news is about we're in an El Nino cycle, and there's been a lot of projections that it's going to be a wet winter. So yeah, and that's what I was going to say. So we're still waiting. It hasn't materialized yet. We do hear we're going to get some rains coming in next week, and you know, and we'll just keep an eye on it. And we're in close communications with DWR and the Army Corps. So this will be a standing item that we'll have a discussion at every board meeting through the winter, just so we're all aware of flood conditions, reservoir conditions, river conditions, and that type of thing. Let's see, our next board meeting, we don't have a meeting in January. We always skip January. So we'll have our first board meeting in February of next year. And that's where we'll do our chair and vice chair rotations. And Butte County will rotate into the chair position, and Yuba City will rotate into vice chair position. So I just want to say happy holidays, Merry Christmas to everybody. I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Chairman, and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, if I could ask one quick question, and when you took this to the city of Live Oak, was Lackver Gag, was he a big supporter of this? Did he try to, you know?
He was a great supporter, and he was a yes vote. So
he was a yes vote? You voted 5 times, yes? Yeah, nice work, nice work. I like that, the way to govern your. And the other thing I just wanted to say was, old folks like Bill and I remember when the Cherokee Canal had no vegetation.
Yeah, no kidding.
None.
You float down it in your
And
community.
so all I'm going to say is to those of you that are on drainage district boards, levee district boards, don't let anything, if possible, grow in your canals, in your ditches, because this is what happens. $200 million to get that thing squared away. It's a joke.
Well, spraying probably, but I'm not politically correct. 240. If I may, I'd like to report a little bit from Oroville's perspective. You know, there's the Oroville Dam Oversight Committee, which our senator, past Senator Nielsen, set up. Matt Conant goes there too. But we also have a Feather River Recovery Alliance, which is a group of individuals that own businesses in the Oroville area that pretty much self-fund. We meet monthly, if not twice a month, and we're very concerned about the new operations manual. Yeah, it's great that they're looking at climate forecast operations. We heard a great report at last meeting where they're hitting the mark the last 7 years much better than they ever did. And I had this smart off at the end, you know, I'm 70 years old. I'm more worried about when you miss, you know, at 20 years. Our worry is that they'll get so full of their own science, they'll make a bigger mistake and flood us all. And so we do have an eye on it, and we do stay in contact with Michael, and we do care, and we're not trying to be obstructionists as much as we're trying to just hold DWR and the operations accountable to safety. And for example, the arrogance that they don't get, and I know I can speak plainly in this room because you're going to understand what I'm saying. They give this great report about climate forecasts, how we're going to deliver water, all the way through it. And at the end, he goes, and of course, we're really worried about public safety. And the irony of that is their culture is such, they don't understand they've got it backwards. So I just want to let you know that we work on it all the time. And I want to bring up the Oroville levee very quickly. I think even new mapping is going to prove that under normal operations without failures, they could flood Oroville, and there is a need for levee improvement there. And again, I'm not asking for money from this organization, just the support. So I just wanted to bring you up to date and let you know that we care. I hope that you'll engage too downstream and say, hey, margin of safety is more important than water delivery to us. And let them know that we're not going to stand by and make a bigger mistake in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Conley. Any other questions for Michael? You know, I just got one comment and one question. So, Michael, how many miles long is Cherokee Canal that they got to clean?
The whole thing.
Yeah, but how many miles? Was it 30 miles?
Probably 30 miles.
Yeah, I think it's about that, Chris. I don't know if I wanted to say 20 something, but it's right in that 20 to 30 miles.
So it's like $6 million a mile, right?
Higher than that. So if it's 20,
Well, if it's, I was
it's
thinking
like
30.
10 million a mile.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. Anyway, the other one comment was what Supervisor Conley was talking about Orville Dam and the safety issues. When it was being operated, when a spillway failed, there were so many issues with the Orville Dam that were not functioning according to plan or correctly, like 2 out of 52 piezometers working. The spillway hadn't been tamped, so it failed. A lot of this lack of as-built apparently at the time of the almost failure of the emergency spillway. These are all things that I just question whether DWR really understands how critical and how lucky they were that they didn't have a major failure. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.